Wolfpack, what is going on? It's your boy, the Wolf of Roto Street. RotoStreetJournal.com, we breed and feed you fantasy wolves. Here with your Week 8 Waiver Wire, my favorite show of the week, the most in-depth we get into the nitty-gritty, getting you those pickups that you need to have in order to plow forward. And there's been some huge injuries. Chris Godwin, the last play of Monday Night Football. Oh, I could go on and on. Had that guy on nearly every team. Heartbreaker. We also have Brandin Aiyuk tear his ACL, and just the chaos of this season continues. So you're going to need those guys to plug in some holes, some streamers, some long-term value. There are some really big names out there, a few that I do think are worth about 40 to 50% of your FAAB this week. I don't say that every week, but I do think there's a handful of potential league winners amidst all the chaos of Week 7. So let's dive into that Week 8 waiver wire and get you the best pickups. As always, if you enjoy what you're hearing at any point, the thumbs up button, the heart button on Twitter, the shares, the retweets, all that stuff truly does help us grow. So thank you again so much for being here. We really, really appreciate it. Let's dive on in. We'll start with quarterbacks as we always do. You need to replace Jayden Daniels. Where can you turn to? It's a likelihood he's going to miss Week 8 at minimum with a rib injury. Doesn't seem like it's something that will shoulder him too long, shelve him rather. But ultimately, we do have to have a backup plan for Week 8. And first place I'm going to look is Tua Tagovailoa. He is only 46% rostered, dropped in a lot of leagues, especially those without IR spots. And his practice window just opened, and they are expecting him to return to a beautiful matchup against the Arizona Cardinals, giving up the 5th most points to quarterbacks. We're talking about a guy in Tua who's been the quarterback 14 and quarterback 9 across his past 2 years. He has over 5 games with over 30 fantasy points across his span with Mike McDaniels. He's been a top 12 quarterback 40% of the time in that span, and he's been a top 24 quarterback nearly 90% of the time. So this is a guy with a solid floor and some boom upside, some boom potential there to Tua. You don't need me to spell it out for you, but when you have Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle doing all the work for you, and I know Tua gets his hate, oh, he's just a system QB, he's just dinking and dunking and letting everyone do the work, but we've seen how this has looked with Tyler Huntley, with whoever, Tim Boyle, like the creatures under center. I think it's time to put a little respect on Tua's name and how much more valuable this offense is with him there. He's a great engineer of the scheme, and I think this team will welcome him back with open arms here in Week 8, and your fantasy team could greatly benefit from a great spot start and a really easy schedule these next few weeks. Sure, Buffalo next week, not great, but other than that, you got, again, Arizona, a top 5 matchup, then the Rams, the Raiders, and the Pats. None of those defense are overly scary. So I do like Tua as the number 1 quarterback ad, should he be out there. But going back to the well with Drake May, my number 2 quarterback ad, and maybe even better than Tua as a long-term ceiling play here, only 16% rostered is Drake May. He went for 276 yards and 2 touchdowns in just his second NFL game. 26 of 37 as well. Solid completion rate. Didn't run nearly as much, had 18 rushing yards on the ground on just 4 scrambles, but this now makes back-to-back games. His first 2 games as an NFL quarterback, Drake May has topped 20 fantasy points, showing off a cannon arm, showing off the mobility. Now, the rub with him, and the reason why I probably would go Tua over him, is the schedule is just so rough for Drake May. Gets the Jets this upcoming week, although with all those injuries, we just saw Russell Wilson. We're going to talk about him in just a second. Ultimately, he just put up over 24 fantasy points against the Jets, so maybe they aren't such a terrifying matchup after all. But Tennessee, Chicago, Rams, decent matchup, but then going to Miami, who's actually been really, really good against the pass. And then you got one great matchup there against Detroit or Indianapolis rather, before the bye. So not a great schedule here across the next few games. Not the best of spots if you're looking for just a 1-week rental to fill in for Jayden Daniels against the Jets. But again, with those injuries, they were very susceptible to Russell Wilson. Could see Drake May putting some numbers up yet again, given his likelihood to push it down the field. He loves to chuck it. His ADOT is right towards the top of the league so far since he became the starter. Love to see that from Drake May. But we just mentioned Russell Wilson, 8% rostered, surprisingly smashed in his debut. Now, I know the beginning, the first half, it's like, what are we doing? Why is Russell out here? He's sailing things. Looks like he does not belong on an NFL field. But in that second half, he really did cook. Ultimately threw for 264 yards and 2 touchdowns, and realized, unlike Justin Fields, I put the air under the ball, I throw it up there, and my man George Pickens is going to go get it. Really love to see that production there from Russell Wilson. And just the again, willingness to just chuck it up and let his receiver, who wins every single jump ball, go out and do his thing. And unlike, again, Drake May, we've got a great schedule coming up for Russell Wilson. In fact, the Steelers have the number one schedule from here on out for quarterbacks, starting off with the Giants, a top 8 matchup next Monday night for you guys out there. So check out our guy, Russell Wilson, our guy. We've been hating Russell Wilson all year, but again, he looked better than anything we have seen across his time in Denver. Seemed ready to roll. It seems like he's definitely going to spark this passing attack overall. So if you need a quarterback, I would rank him Tua, Drake May, then Russ, but really just a 1-week rental. You could certainly make the case for Russ over Drake May, given the schedule, given the way he just performed in that first week back. Alrighty, guys, we got 200 of you here right from the jump after 5 minutes. You love to see it. Thank you so much for coming on in. Get those questions in. I'll be happy to answer them all once it is over with these positions, your defensive streamers, all that good stuff. Another call out for that thumbs up button, the heart button on Twitter, the shares. It really does help us grow. I know we're out an hour early today, but with the NBA season starting, we're going to move this to 6 p.m. moving forward, so we're not going up against some of those big games. I want to get you guys your action ahead of that. Alrighty, let's move to the running back position for the Week 8 waiver wire, and I'll just be honest, this is where it drops off a little bit, mostly the same as last week, and that's kind of what happens with the running back position at this point of the year. You either have a starter go down and you're bidding everything to get that backup running back, or it's just kind of stocking up and hoping you get ahead of the curve and don't have to find yourself in that position. Very rare we're going to find just random, pretty usable guys here. It's all about handcuffs. It's all about boosting that long-term upside for your roster. And on a Week 8 coming up where we have no bye weeks, you should hopefully have a full roster where you don't need to plug and play too many streamers at the running back position. So let's talk about some of those top handcuffs, and ideally, again, a handcuff with benefit that could potentially start for you should you need it. Ray Davis topping the list for my favorite running back pickups of the week. And granted, he's only the 7th ranked overall pickup on my list. You can find that over at RotoStreetWolf on Twitter. I love the receivers over the running backs this week, and we're going to get to them. But Ray Davis gets another touchdown back-to-back weeks now with a score. Even with James Cook in, we see Davis looking solid yet again. 5 carries, 41 yards, and the score. Also hauls in a 6-yard catch. This is more so, again, though, what happens if Cook is out? We saw it last week. Davis had 23 opportunities. He had over 80% of the running back rushes, nearly 70% of the snaps with James Cook out. So we know he is the guy if Cook misses time. And even if Cook is in, we just saw this week, garbage time, cleanup, mop-up duty could be that kind of bull that just blows you down after this Bills team builds a big lead. Davis is perfect to be that bulldozer, kind of bleed out the clock for you. So we saw that type of role this past week for him. I really, really like Ray Davis as probably the best handcuff with benefits that's out there in over half of leagues. Still want to point out Tyler Algier. I know he took a huge step back, only 36 rush yards versus the Seahawks compared to 103 yards and a touchdown over 19 fantasy points just a week ago. Seems like a big letdown, but remember, you weren't taking Tyler Algier off the waiver wire to put him into your lineups. Hopefully not, at least. It was because if something happens to Bijan Robinson, who had 21 carries again to the 5 for Tyler Algier, we're starting to see it had been kind of a 1A, 1B, a split backfield workload. We are now seeing Bijan fully healthy, really starting to separate 21 rushes to the 5 again of Tyler Algier this past week. But it is just going to show you how valuable this backfield role is under Zach Robinson. The zone blocking scheme is looking great. They're throwing to the running backs at a decent clip. And Algier on his touches, still right over 6 yards a pop, still looking really solid, still a phenomenal pass protector. He would be a true 3-down back in a Falcons offense that is hit or miss right now, but ultimately the easiest playoff schedule for running backs and just in general. So Tyler Algier, a guy I would love to stash on all of my benches, as is Braylon Allen. This one's been a very big disappointment since the offensive coordinator change. Nathaniel Hackett got relieved of his duties, and we know that Hackett was always a fan of running back by committees. That was giving Braylon Allen about 33% of the snaps and touches over that span, and he was looking solid anytime he was getting the work. Well, since that OC has been changed, we have only seen a 14% snap rate for Braylon Allen, only 5 and 3 running back opportunities these past 2 games. it has been rough. And he has no longer – it was nice because you had a handcuff with benefits, essentially, with Braylon Allen. You could toss him in there if needed. You can't do that anymore. You can't trust the guy. But I still think maybe of any player, he is the number one. Like if something happened to Breece Hall, super talented, an absolute monster, 240 pounds with good breakaway speed. And on his limited touches this year, he's right at the top of the list in terms of missed tackles, force per touch. Efficiency metrics are great. This guy is a screaming talent. And the Jets have the softest single schedule of the entire rest of season. If something did happen to Breece Hall, we'd be talking about an every week top 10 running back in Braylon Allen. So again, well worth a roster spot for you guys out there. Wanted to toss out Jaylen Warren, got dropped in a ton of leagues. Similar to the rest of this list, another guy that I really don't think has much value, so assuming the starter in front of him, Najee Harris, stays healthy. And it was one of those things where Najee was looking so bad for so long that maybe Warren comes back and takes over. Well, Harris has really started to pick it up. He's looked much better these past 2 weeks. And so it does seem like Warren is strictly a handcuff as well. But this team does run the ball so much. I mean, Najee Harris had over 20 touches last week, and we still had Jaylen Warren getting 14 touches behind him, ultimately racked up 44 yards on 12 carries, called in 2 catches for 15 yards as well, and just looks like he's definitely back to full health after the Steelers took their time with him and was the clear number 2 back. Cordell Patterson did miss this game, but it was definitely just the Najee, then the Warren show. And again, you probably can't trust Warren unless there's an injury to Najee, but we know last year was one of the most efficient backs in terms of whatever metric you wanted to look at, in terms of rush rate, expectation, rush over expectation, in terms of explosive run rate, in terms of missed tackles, force per touch. Warren crushed it. So if anything did ever happen to Najee Harris, we know this team, the Steelers, are going to run the ball 30-plus times a week, and Warren in a 20-touch role would potentially break fantasy, given how we've seen him on a per-touch basis. Now, speaking of very efficient on a per-touch basis, Jalen Wright, only 8% rostered, and I get it. Now we got Mostert back. Devon Achan's dominating the workload. Wright is a distant third, but he's no longer a healthy scratch. That's a step forward. He had 5 carries for 33 yards, over 6 yards a pop. By far the most efficient back on this team on Sunday, and actually right now leading the Dolphins backfield in yards after contact per attempt, rush yards over expectation per attempt, success rate, EPA per rush. All those advanced metrics are going to Jalen Wright right now. And we got a cakewalk schedule these next 4 weeks. It is strictly a handcuff at this point. You can't trust a third-string running back, never mind Mostert right now. So ultimately, you're hoping, again, you never wish for injuries, but you're not getting any value for Wright unless there's an injury to Achan or Mostert. But we're talking about Achan, who historically struggled in his early career here to stay healthy. We know Raheem Mostert already missed time this year, has a long, lengthy history of soft tissue injuries, and is well over 32 right now. So we could see Jalen Wright ultimately get thrust into a 1A, 1B type of situation. And again, looks like the best pure runner. We know that this Mike McDaniel scheme has made gold out of running backs last year. Running back 3 and running back 4 for Mostert and Achan in points per game. We got Tua coming back this week. We could definitely see a return to the most productive run scheme in the entire NFL, and Jalen Wright could be a very meaningful part of it. Last running backs on this list, just 2 other guys. Did want to shout out again, Kamani Vidal. Clearly, again, far from J.K. Dobbins, but the only real back to see any time behind him. Dobbins obviously led the way, 17 opportunities compared to just 4 touches for Kamani Vidal. But again, a reminder that this team, the Chargers, want to run the piss out of the ball. They hand it off more than any team other than 3. Top 4 right now in handoffs per game. And ultimately, one of the top 7 offensive lines since adding Joe Alt. This last game against the Cardinals, I don't know what happened. Wasn't great, but Dobbins just seemed like he lost a little gas already. We know this guy has had a really hard time staying healthy throughout his NFL career. I love that he's been having a great comeback season, but he is definitely the right type of back to be targeting in terms of handcuffs, injury history, run-heavy offense, and right now, really nobody else with Gus Edwards on the IR. Vidal would be stepping right into a 3-down role. We know he could handle that at Troy. He was one of the NCAA leaders in terms of missed tackles, in terms of so many metrics for this guy, telling you he is a true 3-down horse that can do a lot of damage with the ball in his hands. So I definitely would like to have Kamani Vidal as a bench stash. And one guy we haven't talked about yet, but felt like tossing him in here, Kendre Miller got his first action of the year and took 6 carries for 36 yards, nice 6 yards a pop, caught 2 balls for just 1 yard, though. But ultimately, we had Dennis Allen finally say something nice about Kendre Miller. Said this guy brought a spark to the offense. Definitely somebody we want to get more involved in the weeks moving forward. And he played Kendre Miller significantly ahead of Jamal Williams, who barely sniffed the field. So I do think in terms of we've seen this role for Alvin Kamara, the Kubiak that has Kubiak offense that has historically dating back to Gary Kubiak and now again his son Clint Kubiak. You could go 30 years back in history and you could just point to how many productive running backs nearly every single season. It doesn't matter who it is. Arian Foster becomes a monster. Steve Slayton, a one-year wonder, but absolutely crushed it when it was a Shanahan. There's so many. I don't know why I decided to choose those two. You could go to Terrell Davis. I mean, there is just Mike Anderson. You can keep throwing the names out there. And this Kubiak offense has been a gold mine for running backs. And now, again, we've seen it happen for Kamara, but if he went down, does look like Kendre Miller would be the next man up out there in 95% of leagues. So if you need to fill that roster bench space with some upside, he is certainly the right type of guy to look at. All righty, Wolfpack. That wraps up our running backs for the week. 300 or so here with us. Love to see it. Thanks again so much. Whether you're catching the replay or live here, another plea for that thumbs up to help us out, get out to more people. We appreciate it so much. And if you're new here, would love to have you subscribe over on YouTube as we make the climb towards 5K. Over 4,200 of you have joined so far, and we'd love to keep those numbers growing. So thank you again so much for your time. I got a nice mailbag brewing here. Keep those questions coming. We'll be answering them in just a minute. Now, as mentioned, the wide receiver position is definitely the cream of the crop on the Week 8 waiver wire, and this is where I would definitely consider spending some big money. Unfortunately, largely due to injuries this week, Brandin Aiyuk done for the year, and of course, Godwin goes down again, the last play of scrimmage, but that is opening up some massive value holes in great offenses right now, and that's going to definitely yield some huge value. So let's start with Jauan Jennings, my number one waiver wire pickup of this week, and ultimately a guy I would spend 35, 40% if I just lost Godwin and or Aiyuk, and I am desperate for a fill-in. The only reason I wouldn't go completely all in is Jauan Jennings is dealing with a hip injury, but the latest from Kyle Shanahan is they expect him back in Week 8, and they're really going to need this guy. We've already seen it, and it's him versus Ricky Pearsall, who should be the number one. Let's decide right now. I'm going to go with Jauan Jennings. I'll save you the suspense. We'll break the case for Ricky Pearsall in just a second. But why is Jauan Jennings the clear number one for me? 46.5 PPR points in Week 3 against the Rams. That's why. We've already seen how much damage this guy can do, Jauan Jennings, when he is a focal point of the offense. And even when not, this guy's had 11% target share in every single game he's played in an offense with George Kittle, an offense with Deebo Samuel. We know this guy can command looks. And when he has the actual opportunity to command a real huge slice of it, we've seen him put up the 15th most points by a wide receiver in the last 10 years, the most points of the 2024 season so far. Right now, Jauan Jennings ranks 5th best in yards per route run, 2.91. He ranks 3rd best in fantasy points data separation win rate, 25%. This guy is a genuine baller here. He just really needs the opportunity. The team gave him a 2-year, $12 million deal, so they certainly respect what he can bring to the table. And we've seen it even in last year's Super Bowl. Whenever this man gets used, he always performs. So Jauan Jennings, my top receiver pickup, my top overall pickup of Week 8. And again, a guy I would bid my number one claim on. I would bid 40 to 50% of my FAAB if I needed a wide receiver, but not far behind him and certainly could outproduce Jauan Jennings is his teammate, Ricky Pearsall, who comes into his first NFL action after getting shot this preseason. And does he light the world up? No. 3 catches, 21 yards, 5 targets. But guess what? He ended up leading the team in route share. His 16% target share was very usable. And we're talking about a first-round pick singled out by Kyle Shanahan, the one he wanted to get. They talked about him being a phenomenal man beater in man coverage. And that's what they're going to need with Aiyuk now done for the year with that ACL injury. You got the scheme touches for Deebo. You got the creative usage for all these guys. But they really do need a true man beater when Aiyuk is off the field. And that is what Ricky Pearsall was a great success rate against all types of coverages at the collegiate level, but especially against man. And just kind of that mystery box upside here with Ricky Pearsall. You got a round 1 rookie pick, handpicked by Kyle Shanahan, the offensive guru of the NFL, and going into a quality situation here, immediate volume on a good offense from a good quarterback. What more could you ask for? Yes, again, I do think Jauan Jennings is the first man up, but we also do have Deebo Samuel right now hospitalized with pneumonia. There's a real chance that we're seeing Ricky Pearsall and Jauan Jennings as the top two wide receivers. Of course, Kittle would still be is going to be the number one beneficiary of all these injuries around him, but these two receivers are still going to get theirs in a really solid scheme that makes the most out of the layup looks and getting you the yak opportunities. Pearsall is going to be phenomenal in those situations. Did want to shout out to, in your deeper formats, those of you not available in my league, well, Jacob Cowing out there in literally 100% of leagues right now. He led the 49ers in week 7 in receiving yards. He is an RSJ favorite prospect. Big fan. Our dynasty team absolutely loves Cowing, has been raving about him. He's definitely going to get his shot here too after what he did in week 7. And so if you're in a deep league, definitely stash Cowing. Could see him somebody a lot of people are scrambling to go get after week 8 here. But yeah, again, in the battle between Jauan Jennings and Ricky Pearsall, both of them your top 2 waiver wire pickups for week 8, but I do lean to Jennings just given what we've already seen from the guy this year. Indeed, the mystery box appeal is nice with Ricky Pearsall, but it reminds me, like, Jauan Jennings has proven to you he's a boat. You know, that Family Guy clip. You could have a boat or you could have a mystery box. I'll take the boat 10 out of 10 times here. It could be a boat. Yeah, maybe Ricky Pearsall can put up 46 points like we've seen Jauan Jennings do already. Moving forward, though, Romeo Doubs still out there in over half of leagues. Doesn't make much sense to me. This guy has led the Packers in routes and snaps every single week he's been active, really dating back to last year since Jordan Love took over. Now, his performance has been inconsistent. A lot of people called him the sacrificial X. He's a good blocker. He can clear the routes out. It just kind of does it all to make the offense function. But lately, he has not been sacrificial in the least. 10 targets, leading the team by a mile. The next closest guy had 6. That was Datavian Wicks. Ultimately, 48 of the 58 snaps, 32 of the 37 routes did go to Romeo Doubs, who has now gone in his past 2 games. This last week, 10 targets, 8 catches, 94 yards. Nice. The week before that, 2 touchdowns, 49 yards on 3 catches. Back-to-back 18-plus point days in full PPR settings. Really, really nice production here for Romeo Doubs. We know the guy, we look no further than that Cowboys playoff game, can be the true number one. And it's going to be tricky in this offense. They love to spread. That's what makes this team so dangerous. But whereas in Dontavian Wicks, another guy to be looking on this week's waiver wire, far more likely to be out there, 27% rostered. But he splits time with Christian Watson. Doubs has that one role, that X receiver on lock. And then we got Wicks and Watson in a rotation. Yeah, Jaden Reed man in the slot and in there about 70% or so of the time. But it is Wicks that is more in a timeshare here, whereas Doubs has that every down role. So again, if I had the choice between one or the other, it's certainly Doubs. And I think most of the fantasy league agree with that. But Wicks himself, also worth tossing out there, my number 10 overall waiver wire pickup of the week. We'll just kind of quickly cover him since we're on this team. I do like this guy. He leads right now the Packers in target per route run. So anytime he plays it, and last week, 30-yard touchdown over the shoulder, a nice, beautiful catch. 3 catches, 6 targets, 48 yards, and that score. In 2 of his last 3 games, he has had some really, really solid production. Definitely one of the kind of go-to touchdown guys. One of those things where you can't really trust him. You can't really fall in love unless Christian Watson gets hurt. But ultimately, we know that guy has a very lengthy injury history. We know Wicks has a very productive history of performing when he is out there. So I do like tossing out there Dontavian Wicks. So we got our 49ers, we got our Packers, but sandwiched in between those guys, Doubs and Wicks, my number 6 overall pickup of the week and my 4th ranked wide receiver of the week is Keon Coleman. 33% roster, got dropped in a lot of leagues after the Amari Cooper addition. And of course, what does he do? Season high 16.9 points, season high 21.9% target share. Ultimately takes 7 targets for 4 catches and 125 yards and looks really impressive doing so. Some nice contested grabs, some tackle breaking, churning first down. Really impressive stuff here from Keon Coleman. Ultimately led the team in snaps, in targets, in routes, all those things looking really solid for him. Now, the rub is, of course, Amari Cooper only played 34% of the routes in this game. You know that's not going to be the case. And Cooper looks phenomenal. Ultimately caught that touchdown. You know he's going to eventually ascend to the number one guy here in Buffalo. It's just a matter of, does that come at the expense of Coleman or Matt Collins? Looks like at least they want to give Coleman a real shot to lock this thing down. Definitely beat out, again, Matt Collins in routes. Certainly in targets, only one look for Matt Collins this past week. And one thing that of note, Sam Sherman talked about this on his waiver wire show with Hayden Winks. From weeks 1 to 5, Keon Coleman only had one total slot snap. Literally didn't move there. And all summer, a lot of people talked about he struggles separating, but if you use him as a big slot, man, could he be productive. Now, I don't want to overreact, but 3 slot snaps across both of his last 2 games, just showing more move around, versatile usage. We saw a 50-yard catch, a tackle, a quick hit, and he broke a tackle and then continued. He's off to the races from there. That's what he really does best. That's when he outproduced Jayden Reed at Michigan State when they were collegiate teammates, was when he was kind of playing that power slot role. Again, 3 slot snaps in back-to-back weeks. No, not anything crazy, but when he only played 1 from weeks 1 through 5, it at least shows a little more creativity, a little more flexibility to this role that might keep him in that every down role despite Amari Cooper ascending at this point. They do have a nice schedule to do the Bills here, so I really like Keon Coleman. Again, I know Amari Cooper is going to continue to ascend and continue to eat into that workload, and I know J.J. Zacharyson kind of disproved a lot of people. Well, Amari Cooper opening everything up for Keon Coleman, right? Those two didn't play a single snap together, didn't run a single route together this past week. So ultimately, you do have to be a little concerned that Amari Cooper becomes the main vein here. But for right now, it was an impressive day for Keon Coleman. And any rookie ascending in a great offense always is at the top of your waiver wire. About a 15 to 20% or so bid for him is what I would recommend. Now, maybe a tier drop here, but Rashad Bateman, very impressive. Still, I'd say worth 8 to 12% or so bid if you're desperate at wide receiver. And I know a lot of you are going to be, given the injuries at the position. But Rashad Bateman, 18% rostered. We had Zay Flowers go down, and doesn't seem like anything overly concerning as of right now. But we saw Bateman ascend to the number 1 wide receiver rep in here. 4 targets, catches them all for 121 yards and a touchdown. Nobody on the Ravens saw more than 4 targets, so it was definitely a spread the wealth game. But we've now seen Rashad Bateman get 4 targets or more in every single game this year except for 1. He has 9 or more half PPR points in all but 1 game in his last 5. So really, really solid. Again, 9+ in 5 of his last 6. Really looking solid here is Rashad Bateman. So those are the kind of the cream of the crop. There is one guy, though, that I need to mention ahead of all of these guys. So my top 4 overall pickup of the week, number 4 for me is Jalen McMillan of the Bucs. As mentioned, we now know that Chris Godwin is going to be done for the year. It's devastating. It hurts. But ultimately, Jalen McMillan could provide you, not going to get you what Godwin did, but this guy was a dog and Jalen Polk. Remember, when those Washington receivers, we had Adunze at 2.51 yards per route run. We had Jalen McMillan not far behind at 2.32, well ahead of Jalen Polk, 1.84, who went a full round ahead of Jalen McMillan in this draft, which a lot of people, myself included, and I'm a Bats fan, I like Jalen McMillan more. I think this guy was a better talent. There was tons of training camp hype about Jalen McMillan. This coaching staff loves him, calling him a dog, calling him someone we can trust. Guy that's making plays since day one. He wants to be good. He wants to learn. He continues to get better and better. You put on the pads, he loses no speed. Like, all the camp hype was very real on this guy. He came out in week 1, hauled a long ball touchdown in, and then unfortunately he got hurt. But don't forget, like, he was the clear number 3 wide receiver to start the year. He had played all, but when you compare him and Chris Godwin, he ran only 1 fewer route than Godwin over those first 2 weeks of the season before he got hurt. And you look right now at the type of routes he's doing, the type of usage per Ryan Heath of fantasy points. Right now, Jalen McMillan, 59% of his routes have been horizontal breaking or underneath. Number 1 in those type of routes was Chris Godwin. 67.3% of his routes were those kind of, when we talk about horizontal breaking underneath, we're on those layup rolls, the Cooper Kupp roll that we said would make Chris Godwin an absolute star this year, that had been making Chris Godwin one of the best picks you could have made in fantasy. there's a very real chance that Jalen McMillan just kind of slides right into that role as a very, very productive slot receiver. 67% of his NCAA routes were from the slot. Explosive slot type of guy, too. We got deep speed to burn. I do think, Liam Cohen, we're talking about an offense right now with the Bucs. They're fourth in the NFL with 29.9 points per game behind only Washington, Baltimore, and Detroit. In their last 4 games, they put up 30, 51, 51, and 33 points. They have 30-plus points in 5 of their 7 games on the year. I get it. Godwin, Evans, both of them now hurt. I can't imagine this is the factory that it has been, but I really do think Liam Cohen is going under the radar as maybe the best play caller of this entire OC hiring cycle. Really love what this guy's done. Think he's going to be warranting head coach consideration sooner than later. He has the Sean McVay kind of offense where he puts his own little spin on it, which offers a lot more verticality than what we typically see. So I really like Jalen McMillan as the most likely to fill in that Chris Godwin style role. Sure, it could be Trey Palmer. He played over half his snaps out of the slot last year. We know he can get deep. We know he has a somewhat history with Baker Mayfield as well. Sterling Shepard has been playing ahead of Jalen McMillan so far as well. But if I had to put my chips in on somebody who could be a true league winner, who could be an absolute difference maker, it's Jalen McMillan, and the team clearly is wanting him to be the one that steps up. So that is my, again, top. I would go Jauan Jennings, Ricky Pearsall, Romeo Doubs, but then right underneath them is Jalen McMillan, a guy that I would bid 20% or so of my FAAB on to try and get that Cooper Kupp, the next type of slide in here for this offense. Now, you miss out on all these guys, even Dontavian Wicks, even Rashad Bateman. 1% rostered, Cedric Tillman coming out of nowhere. First game without Amari Cooper. What does he do? 12 targets, 81 yards, 25% target share. And now we might have Jameis Winston, the ultimate YOLO quarterback, a guy that made both Mike Evans and Chris Godwin top 4 fantasy wide receivers back in the day, a guy that can throw for 5,000 yards and 40 touchdowns, the absolute gunslinger of gunslingers. Jameis Winston is likely to be their quarterback as long as DTR. He actually played ahead of Winston, which I have no clue what's going on there. But he left the game with a finger. Winston comes in for a quarter, and what does he do but throw a touchdown and a 2-point conversion, the absolute quarterback machine. And Cedric Tillman, he led all wide receivers in Week 7 expected fantasy points with 24.2. According to Jacobs Gibbs, a 31% first read target share tied with David Njoku for the team lead went to Cedric Tillman. Whatever reason, he became the clear go-to guy. Not Jerry Jeudy, not Elijah Moore, Cedric Tillman. And hey, we see this happen every year. A random guy finally gets his shot, and he never lets go. I could see Cedric Tillman, especially again if Jameis Winston ends up being that quarterback. We know Deshaun Watson will not be returning the rest of the year. It's just a matter of, do they mix in DTR? Because if it's DTR, it's like, who am I really going to play with Dorian Thompson-Robinson at the quarterback? Nobody. Don't really care for him. But if it's Jameis Winston, Cedric Tillman could really work his way into that top 36 or so wide receiver conversation, and no one's going to be looking at him. Last wide receiver I wanted to mention, so I'm going to get dropped in a lot of leagues, is Jalen Tolbert, just 20% rostered. I get it. The Cowboys offense has looked abysmal, but this happened last year, and it's not a guarantee that we see the same type of explosion, but going into their bye last year, they were bottom 20 in terms of total scoring, in terms of passing yards. Dak was getting cut in every league, and we're seeing Dak get cut right now. But don't forget that we did see this Cowboys offense completely turn it around after their bye. They ultimately ended up leading the NFL in passing yards and pace per play. It just became an offensive explosion. And that is within the realm of possibility here. And if that happens, Jalen Tolbert's going to be the clear number 2. In his last 5 games, he has over 11 fantasy points in 3 of them. He had a nice 6.3 last week. Nothing crazy, but in a game where they got completely stifled, he did still see 5 targets, 4 catches, 43 yards against the Lions. So with the bye week to rest upon, they come out and they get an absolute cakewalk. Not a single bottom 10 matchup the rest of the season. San Fran, Atlanta, Philly, Houston, Washington, across their next 5 games. 3 of those rank in the top 10. None of them rank outside the top 20 in terms of matchups for wide receivers. So a beautiful spot for this Cowboys passing game to get it right. And Jalen Tolbert, forgotten because of the bye week in a lot of leagues, someone to look for out there on your waiver wires. All right, that wraps up wide receivers. Again, wide receivers, definitely the most important position on the week 8 waiver wire with a couple guys that I would bid 40, 50% on in Jauan Jennings and Ricky Pearsall. Of course, Romeo Doubs, if he's still lingering out there in your leagues. We're about to get to all your questions, but first we got to make it through the tight ends. Would love over 400 of you here. When I go at 7, we sometimes hit even 700, 800 live. Would love your help here, Wolfpack, with the thumbs up button. If you appreciate the content, the heart button on Twitter. Help us continue to grow and get out to more people as we help you guys out with your rosters and getting you these waiver wire picks. Thanks again so much for being here. Let's wrap up, whether you're live with us or catching the replay, with some tight ends. This might be the best week of waiver wire tight ends we'll get all year. We certainly have not seen one quite like it yet. There's legitimately 5 tight ends I actually like on the waiver wire. And in a year where this position has been non-existent, it's kind of crazy that 5 guys that I think are legitimately viable exist. We'll start with Cade Otton, though. Of course, this is springboarding from the Chris Godwin injury, the fact that there's going to be a ton of targets. We're also going to probably have Mike Evans with that hammy out for a 3, 4, who knows how many weeks, but certainly an extended period of time here. They're going to need someone to step up, and at least for Monday night, that guy was Cade Otton. He ultimately had 10 targets, leading the team, 8 catches for 100 yards, a PPR machine. And we've talked about Cade Otton a ton, the fact that he is always, the last couple of years, top 5 in tight end routes, top 5 in tight end snaps, always out on the field. Just doesn't typically get much production because you're playing with Evans and Godwin. But when he needed to step up, when those guys were off the field, Cade Otton showed he can really thrive there. Again, 8 catches and 100 yards. We're talking about an offense that's 4th in total points. That puts up, we talked about with the Jalen McMillan guy, 30, 51, 31, and 33 points in the last 4, 30 plus in 5 of 7 games. They're going to take a step back without the explosive wide receivers they typically have at their disposal. But I still think this offense can hum because Liam Cohen is a great play caller. So I think Otton is definitely the first tight end I would look at. Somebody that can definitely come in here and eat some of those underneath routes. It's what he did this last week, and I could see it happening yet again. If you miss on him, though, Hunter Henry, he got dropped in a ton of leagues, and he's looking like Drake May's favorite target. 13.2 and 11.6 half PPR points across his last 2 games. The only 2 games he's played with Drake May, he's seen 16% and 25% target share across those 2 games. Most recently, 8 catches and 92 yards on 9 targets. That, again, paced the team. Hunter Henry's thriving, and Drake May loves him. He's kind of that safety valve. He's been getting deep down the seams. I love Hunter Henry with Drake May right now. The matchups aren't great moving forward. Jets, Titans, Bears, as we talked about with Drake May. Not what you're exactly looking for, but ultimately, I like Hunter Henry. I think he can do some real damage if you miss on Cade Otton. That's my next guy. But Noah Fant, back-to-back 60-yard games. Saw 4 targets, caught all of them for 65 yards. I mean, we all know the story with this guy. If you were building a tight end in a lab, it would look like Noah Fant. He's a beast. He's got speed. Ultimately does not see a ton of volume given DK and Lockett and JSN, but DK could miss some time with a knee injury. Might see an elevated role here for Noah Fant, who has hovered right around 56 to 60% of the route so far this year. It's not the true every down tight end that many of us were hoping for. That rookie tight end, AJ Barner, has been sneaking in there for a decent amount of work. But ultimately, Fant is looking great. He's getting a lot of downfield usage, a lot of intriguing run after the catch screens and those different type of opportunities in this Ryan Grubb offense that currently is leading the NFL in pass rate over expectation, is leading the NFL in dropbacks over expectation per game. There is a ton of passing volume, and if DK's mouth is removed, Noah Fant has a real shot to be a monster. We also have Jonnu Smith, 8 and 7 targets the last 2 weeks. Now, maybe that's a Tyler Huntley thing. We know even dating back to Baltimore where he would pepper Mark Andrews. That could be it. And with Tua coming back, maybe we see that disappear. But we do see Jonnu coming off a season-high 84% route share. What did he do when his coach finally elevated his role over Durham Smythe? We saw Jonnu Smith put up 96 yards on 7 targets, 7 catches, also scoring a touchdown as the #1 scoring tight end of week 8. And with, again, maybe it's the Huntley just dink and dunk offense, but we saw him getting very creative usage. And he was my #1 tight end sleeper heading into the year because Mike McDaniels does 2 things really well: screens and getting speed into space. And Jonnu, over the last 3 years, has by far the most 20-plus mile-per-hour runs of any tight end. He's got the 2 biggest plays on tight ends after the catch. he's just deadly. He's so good, and they're finally getting him the looks. And I know when Tua comes back, we're going to see Tyreek Hill reemerge. We're going to see Jalen Waddle reemerge. But if Jonnu can be alongside them in that 80% or so route range, he's going to have some more blowups. So I really like adding Jonnu Smith and seeing how these things play out. The last guy to toss out there is an impressive rookie here, Ja'Tavion Sanders. It has been just horrendous watching this Panthers offense. For a while, there was a nice little shine to Andy Dalton. Maybe he's this year's Flacco, and that has completely worn off. And it is likely we're going to see the Bryce Young experience, once more. But either way, we're seeing Sanders really start to emerge. 5, 7, and 6 targets the last 3 weeks. Most recently, hauled in all 6 of those looks for 61 yards. Now, Tommy Tremble was out for both of those past 2 games where we've seen the career highs of 7.4 and then 9.1 half PPR points. So I wouldn't go overly crazy here given that. But the schedule is ripe here. We got a rookie that's starting to emerge, and they're really going to, if I'm the Panthers at least, you want to see what your young guys got. So I think we're going to see more and more burn. I'm not overly concerned about Tommy Tremble's presence. I think Sanders has earned this role by many people's account, was the best tight end prospect behind only Brock Bowers. And it was a weak class behind Brock Bowers, but a lot of people had him as the clear number 2 guy, and he's playing like it right now. So I do like Ja'Tavion Sanders this week. If you miss out on, again, Cade Otton, Hunter Henry, Noah Fant, and Jonnu Smith, Ja'Tavion Sanders, 5 decent tight ends there for you on the Week 8 waiver wire. Definitely consider. And how would I do my FAAB? I'd say about 15 to 20% on Cade Otton. I think Hunter Henry not too far behind, maybe 12 to 20% himself, 12 to 15 or so. Noah Fant more so in that 5-ish% range. Jonnu Smith also in that 5 to 8%. I just don't think you're going to need to do more, even if he pans out there. Ja'Tavion Sanders, I wouldn't put any money on. I would just toss something in there and see how it goes. But that wraps up all of my top 20 overall pickups of the week by position so far. We will now move to the mailbag in just a second, but let's hit first our defensive streamers for Week 8. We've been on fire with these so far this year. I hope we keep the good times rolling. Starting with a name I always go with. Green Bay Packers still somehow out there in well over half of leagues, whether you're on Yahoo, whether you're on Sleeper. They get Jacksonville, which has not actually been the best of matchups. They're not great on offense, but Trevor Lawrence, for all his faults, he's actually protecting the ball decently well. But I still see a Packers team 3rd in total fantasy points on the year. And sure, they just are coming off their season low in fantasy production, just 4 points against Houston, but they only gave up 22 total points, 4 sacks. I mean, they played really well on defense, getting Stroud all confused. They're still averaging over 11 points per game on defense. 17 forced turnovers are the highest mark in the league so far. And again, even though Lawrence protects the ball okay, they do give up a bunch of sacks. The Packers have 20 sacks through their 7th game, which is tied for the 6th most, while Jacksonville's allowed 17 sacks so far. They have the 27th ranked line by Pro Football Focus. And really, what has this Packers defense just been lights out on? It's second half. Their defensive shifts have been phenomenal. They've only allowed 22 total points in their last 5 games combined in the second half. That is A+. That is phenomenal. So this is the defense, similar to the Vikings light, I would say, like a diet Vikings defense. They just get it done no matter what the matchup is, but they just don't have that respect on their name quite yet. So I do love going Packers defense. You miss on them, though, out there in almost every league is the Detroit Lions, 15% rostered on Sleeper, 21% rostered on Yahoo. We have Aiden Hutchinson out. And how do the boys respond for Detroit? 4 sacks, an interception against a good Vikings offense here, propelling them to victory. Solid. And now they are the 11th ranked defense through 7 weeks. Haven't been anything overly special, but a top 12 unit in fantasy so far. And we've seen the ceiling. Just 2 weeks ago against the Cowboys, they held them to 9 points. They had 5 turnovers to Detroit. They put up 18 fantasy points as a defense. And now they get the best possible matchup you can ask for. No team has given up more points to opposing defenses than the Titans. 11 points per game on average. They've surrendered. 12 turnovers is 2nd most in the league behind only Vegas. Sacks right up there in the top 5 in the league. And sure, Mason Rudolph came in last week. Was it better? Yeah, he had nowhere really to go but they still gave up 13 defensive points in fantasy to the Buffalo Bills. Mason Rudolph threw 1 pick. He got sacked 3 times. It's not maybe the pick 6 machine of Will Levis, but it is still a great spot for this Detroit team at home as 10.5 point favorites. No team is allowed a higher pressure rate other than the Patriots compared to the Titans here this year. So this is definitely a great spot for them. Do also want to shout out, though, the Los Angeles Chargers. They are, I have them ranked ahead of the Lions, actually, this week. Started out real hot this year, 14-11 points. They've been largely mediocre since. But what will get you right? A matchup with the Saints, especially if they are led by Spencer Rattler. They've given up the last 2 weeks 17 and 20 fantasy points to Tampa Bay and Denver. 5 and 6 sacks surrendered in each of those games, a touchdown surrendered in each of those games, and multiple turnovers to both of those defenses. This Saints line is decimated. Rattler's getting pressured beyond belief. I think this Chargers team at home is in a great spot to rebound. Now, if Derek Carr does play, it does lower the ceiling. There's no doubt about it. But this is a far cry here for the Saints since they ultimately the record-setting start to the year with those back-to-back 48-point days. They have been absolutely pathetic. 7, 17, 7, 17, and 20 fantasy points since those first 2 games. Nice floor, great ceiling. Love the Chargers as a pickup, only available. They're only 42% rostered on Yahoo, 36% rostered on Sleeper. The last defense I will just toss out here are the Chiefs. I know on Yahoo they do not make that 50% threshold, 62% rostered on Yahoo, but I've seen them dropped in a handful of my leagues. They're also only 34% rostered on Sleeper. And they're getting a Raiders team that's given up the second most fantasy points to defenses. They've given up the most turnovers per game. Since they lost Devontae Adams, they have been 11, 16, 13, and 17 points allowed to defenses. Minshew came right in and did what he does best, throwing some picks last week with Aiden O'Connell banged up. This is a great spot for your Chiefs defense that's generating great pressure, mostly through Chris Jones. Definitely an opportunistic defense. Really, really like the Chiefs. In fact, I would have them ranked above all of these options. I just wanted to toss them out there again. But if I was ranking them, it would be Chiefs, then Packers, then the Chargers, assuming it's Rattler, and then the Lions. But all of these defenses are well inside my top 10. Great picks for this week in week 8 to get you what you need. All righty, Wolfpack. That wraps up all the waiver wire pickups of the week. It is on to your questions. Thank you again so much for jumping on in at an earlier time here, given the NBA slate. We're going to move this permanently to 6 p.m. Eastern time. So thanks again. Another plea before we wrap up. Over almost 500 here. Would love to get us to that number, and a way to help us out is that thumbs up button. This show really does take a lot of the prep, more than any other we do throughout the week. So please do show that you appreciate it with a thumbs up, with a heart button, with a share, retweet. Get some more people in here. It's the toughest one to prep for. It's kind of the least viewed one. I know I've said it before, but we'd love to get more and more love here on this one. I think it's the most valuable content that we do each and every week. Tien Nguyen, sit one. Cup, Tyreek, Devonta Smith, or Tank Dell. Assuming Cup's in, you can't bench him in his return. Assuming Tua's in, you cannot bench Tyreek. So come down to Devonta and Dell, the 2 biggest duds of the week. Now, Tien, I don't love doing sit-start questions on the waiver show. I don't have the advanced analytics. I haven't dug into the matchups too well. But gun to my head, I don't want to play Tank Dell this week. Superflex both suck, but which one should I kick to waivers? Dalton or Jones to grab Winston? I'd probably get rid of Daniel. I mean, they both kind of suck. You're right. I guess I think Dalton's leash is shorter here. I think it is much more likelihood that they're going to just turn to Bryce Young to see what they have in the young guy, whereas Jones might still get an evaluation. I think they both stink, but I'd probably kick Dalton just because I think his time is much shorter here. The clock is running on him. Ryan Zingari. Is Baker still worth starting without Godwin and Evans? It depends. I mean, in a 1 QB league, he'll probably be ranked right around the top 12 for me. So, yeah, he'll be a starter most weeks. But is he going to be the number 3 quarterback in fantasy like he's been all year? I'd have a hard time seeing that. But as I've talked about with all those guys, Jalen McMillan, Cade Otton, some of these pickups, I really do believe in Liam Cohen. I think he's a great play caller. I think Baker, I do buy that he's a great fit for the scheme. He played with the Rams and showed what he could do, and they made sure to go get him into an offense just like this. I like it. I do think Baker's going to be okay for fantasy. I'm not going to just cut him right now, but I think the ceiling is going to be limited compared to what we've seen, obviously. There's no way. How can you go Evans without Evans and Godwin and put up your top 3 numbers? I'd be stunned if Baker can do that with the weapons now at his disposal. Oh, Tyler, I didn't see you had super chatted. I am so sorry. Would have let you cut the line there. Tyler, so generous of you coming in on Sundays with your super chats and now on waiver wire days. I am so sorry, buddy. We do not have my man Campanelli doesn't typically moderate the waiver wire show because we don't typically have super chats on this one. So that's so generous of you, though. I really, really appreciate it. Thoughts on Bateman? 6 targets in 3 straight games and Otters over Ferguson. So I think you're saying Cade Otton over Ferguson. So let's dive into both these questions here. So we talked about Bateman already. He has seen 4 or more targets in every game but one this year. I know 4 targets. What does that matter? Well, when you're playing with a quarterback as explosive as Lamar Jackson, yeah, it definitely matters for sure. He's been in full PPR, above 10 points in 5 of his last 6 games. He's just making big play after big play. And, of course, a season-high 121 and a touchdown this last game out with Zay Flowers banged up. That injury lingers. We could definitely see Rashad Bateman approach top 30 wide receivers coming up in this next week in the rankings. Just really depends on his status. Certainly, the one tricky part with him, the reason why I don't go $20, $30 like I would with a Jalen McMillan, like I would with a Jauan Jennings or a Ricky Pearsall, is if the Ravens can just run the ball down your throat, they're gonna. And that's been the nice part for this passing offense is they really haven't been able to because their defense is not nearly as good as it was last year. There were some stats, I forget the exact numbers, but they trailed for all of like 3 minutes, I think it was, with Lamar Jackson in the second half of last year. So they really could just kind of bleed the clock out with Gus Edwards. Not the case this defense, which is why I like Rashad Bateman just to sell some of these passing game weapons. But there are going to be games where he probably just disappears. You see that one catch for 23 yards game mixed into that nice 5-game stretch he's had. And that kind of reminds you of the floor. When they can get up and just bleed it, they will get up and bleed it. So he worries me a little bit. And that's why I'd probably spend closer to $5-6 in my FAAB to get him. But especially if Flowers is out, he's going to be a huge addition for however long he's out. In terms of Otton over Ferguson, Ferguson's one of the few tight ends. I think Otton's going to move forward and be a really solid option the rest of the season. But Ferguson's one of the few guys that truly is just bankable this entire season. So I'd rather have Ferguson myself. Otton sure can be added, no doubt about it, to be your tight end 2 to play the matchups with. And hell, maybe if he has another 10-target day, I could make that bump for sure. We'll see how big of the role is. It is worth noting the Ravens were like a bottom 3, a great matchup for tight ends this year, top 3 matchup forms. So ultimately, I don't know if this was so much of what the Ravens do and prevent defense from trying to keep Baker from doing the big plays versus Otton just really being special. I think we have a long sample size of Otton not being special. So I'd rather have Ferguson myself. But Otton should be rostered. There's no doubt about it. Thank you again for the super chat myself. Again, Tyler Sperry. And sorry again, I did not get to that faster. Should have had you cut the line a long time ago. So I hope you're still here with us. Nahal Najjar, thoughts on James Cook rest of season? Won't lie, I'm worried about Ray Davis's involvement. I'm worried that Ty Johnson's vulturing work too. I love the guy. I think he's a great talent, and I think this is a team that wants to pound the rock. So he's going to be fine. He's going to be okay. But if you could sell high, I would. I'm not. Never been a huge Cook guy. Thoughts on Cook and Bucky for Jacobs? I think you're giving up too much. I think Bucky and Cook and Jacobs are very comparable, and then adding a good running back like Bucky, I wouldn't do that. Should I trade Pickens for Devonta Smith? I don't think so, Simp. I mean, it seems like the kind of ultimate buy low, sell high on this Pickens one, buy low on Devonta. But I mean, Pickens, there's a world where him and Russ just keep doing this, throwing that moon ball. That's what Russ does best. With Godwin out, I need one to start. Downs, Lazard, or Tolbert. I'd go probably Tolbert of that one, AR Cannabis. Smash the like, fellas. Thank you so much, Yoso Tony. Indeed. Smash that like, smash the heart on Twitter, smash the thumbs up on YouTube if you appreciate what you're hearing. We'd love to have some of you new guys subbing to the channel so you can jump in each and every week with us. Pearsall is available on wires. Would you drop Lazard, Downs, or Tolbert for him? Yes, I'd drop any of the 3 for him. I'd probably drop Lazard first, but Downs is honestly droppable as long as Richardson's the quarterback. It sucks, but he hasn't put up over 6 fantasy points with Richardson as his quarterback through 2 seasons so far, as Josh Downs. So it sucks, but you're only kind of holding on to him in hopes that Flacco comes back, in which case he's a top 20 wide receiver. All right, what else do we got here? Wolfpack. Keenan, guy that traded Caleb Williams and BTJ for Hurts and Puka. I think you might have loaded yourself up for the stretch run. If Puka becomes Puka, they trade Cooper Kupp as the rumblings right here. You set yourself up for some big upside. Love BTJ, love Caleb Williams, so it's a risky move, but I like what you did, Keenan. Plan to pick up McMillan for a long-term stash, but neither drop. I would drop Juju. And Pop Douglas is fine to drop too, but the Chiefs do seem like they need him, but the hamstring flared up. He's already ruled out for this next week. I'm cutting him. I'm sick of him. Bad locker room presence already. Godwin's out 6 to 8 weeks. Who do I thought he was done for the year. Is that a new report, Tunes? Because everything I saw was that he is ultimately done for the season. So if he's out for 6 to 8 weeks, then yeah, you gotta hold on to him, But just for the team locker room status, Would you empty the FAAB chamber for Jauan Jennings? Yeah, I would. Maybe not 100% of the FAAB, but 30, 40. We've seen the guy, 45 points. I don't think you're going to need to empty everything to get him, but I would put the hefty bid in to make sure I can get him. 45.6 points, the highest, or 46.5 points rather, the highest single game for a wide receiver this year. Top 15 in the last 10 years. Top 5 right now in yards per route run. The guy's killing it. He's a great player that when he gets the opportunity, he always seems to thrive. So, yeah, I like Jauan Jennings. I do like Pearsall. Those are the top 2 guys we talked about, Will G. So if you missed it, rewind to the beginning of the show. But, yeah, we like both these guys. They're the top 2 wide receiver ads for sure this week. Do you think Pickens is ready to roll? I do. I think it does seem like that Russ is just going to give him those shots, and Pickens is as good as anybody in the league at coming down with those moon shots. So I think this is a big move for him. Absolutely. I don't know if that's true or not, Steve Garza. I did not see that, but is there any rumblings if this is true about, that's crazy if true. Hopefully everything's okay there. Would you trade Achane for Kamara and Harrison Jr.? Kamara's been better than Achane all year. As soon as Carr comes back, he's going to be right back to that dump-off machine. And Harrison, I know he's been weak these last few weeks, but rookies always tend to hit their stride the second half of the year. You're getting 2 really good players. I like buying low on Achane right now, but you're getting a ton of talent for him. So I would do it. Uncle Ted, Khalif Raymond, must add. No Jama. I think that's actually a really good one I didn't have on this list here, Uncle Ted, and I appreciate you tossing them out there. We know this offense is great. We know it can sustain multiple mouths. Khalif Raymond did step up, 11 fantasy points this last week. I wouldn't call him a must-add, but right on that Cedric Tillman, Jalen Tolbert tier, absolutely. I don't think anyone's going to really be sprinting out to get him. I do think there's a definite world where Sam Laporta finally kind of emerges here in light of this absence. But, yeah, I think Khalif Raymond's a worthwhile toss-up. There's no doubt about it. How is Lamar not the overall number 1 every year? I think, you watch it this year, and it's kind of easy to, play that hindsight bias. Yeah, why would you number 1? I think the big thing this year, as we just were alluding to when we talk about Bateman, the defense has taken a huge step back. Last year, if you had Lamar last year, I did in quite a few leagues, he'd have these 30-point days and you'd love your life. He had plenty of 8-point days, single-point weeks where they just handed the ball off. I remember distinctly I needed 1 point out of the guy in the second half of a game where they were blowing a team out, and they handed the ball off 40 straight times. It was insane. So I think this year, Lamar, number 1 every year. If this defense is what they're going to be looking at, it's just such a big step back for the defense. I think more than most would have projected. And in hindsight, of course, in my rest of season rankings that you can find at rotostreetjournal.com, he's the number 1 quarterback by a mile. So I agree. Brainer. It goes to kind of show you what he plays, how Lamar plays when he's getting pushed. Unbelievable. Trade question: 5-2, 10-team, 2 receiver, 1 flex. Hunt and Smith for my London and Najee. I don't see a need to do that one, Mad Dog. I think London's the best player of this deal. I think Najee and Hunt are comparable. Devonta Smith versus London's a big drop-off, in my opinion. So, no, I would not do that. Luis Perez, is Tajay droppable, or is that championship playoff schedule too sexy not to stash? I won't lie. I do not know the Titans playoff schedule off the top of my head. I'm still kind of in this week 8. We got to keep getting through the season, keep grinding. I'll start to do right when the trade deadline starts approaching in another couple of weeks. I definitely will be doing my playoff trade schedule deep dive, Lewis, but I'm not there yet. You're ahead of me, my man. It really depends, though, who's out there. Because, of course, if Pollard does go down and you get this guy for a juicy championship stretch run, great. But if there's no Pollard injury, I don't think Spears is ever going to be trustable. So he's just a handcuff with a great schedule. but just a handcuff. So if you'd rather have like Braylon Allen, Ray Davis, like that, I'd rather have those guys myself. So depends who's out there and who you're dropping him for, but he's not a must-hold in my opinion, despite a good schedule. And then we got Ferguson or Kraft. Probably Kraft. I'm just going to keep riding that hot hand there. Jackson, Indy, Jax. That's the playoff schedule. Nice to know. I mean, that is gold. That's beautiful. But again, like, is Pollard going to get hurt between now and then? Who knows? Is Spears going to get healthy between now and then? Who knows? I'd rather stash guys that, again, don't drop them for nothing, but if Braylon Allen's out there, if Ray Davis is out there, those type of guys, I think deserve consideration ahead of them. My Nico and Najee for B-Rob. No, Mad Dog. I think you just trade the trade bet, brother. Like, Nico, when he comes back, is the best, like, top 5 wide receiver in fantasy right now. So no, stop giving up the best player in fantasy. Like, you never want to be on the wrong side of the town. Like, you want to be getting the best player, and the only time to do like the best player is if you're getting more players that will fill more holes in your roster. I don't do that now, myself. Alrighty, guys. Well, thank you so much for your support here. On your way out, if you haven't already, please do hit that like button, hit the sub button if you're new around here, whether you're live or catching the replay. All of my content is at roadstreetjournal.com. Updated the rest of season big board for all the big injuries that were suffered this weekend, for all the action we saw. So that is the most up-to-date it can be. So check that out at rotostreetjournal.com. Thanks again so much for being here, guys. In a world full of fancy sheep, be the wolf. Later.